This day in sports history. Well, hey there, and welcome back to another edition of This Day in Sports History, though I am going to try something a little bit different. Loyal listeners may know I've been skipping some days here and there. Life has been a bit all over the place recently, and I've had to make some either this or that choices. But what I've noticed is my listener numbers for each episode are actually higher when I do skip a day or two, so I'm going to do something a little different for a few weeks and take stories from the week, put them in one episode, so it will be more like, This Week in Sports, but I'm not rebranding. We'll see how this test works. So this is day one of this test, and let's get started. On this episode, we've got Jeff Brom declaring, "Let's play football." I've got the origin of one of the all-time great sports races. Ted Williams nearly went south of the border, and we had another tragedy that took the lives of Olympic-caliber athletes. I'll get started right after this.
And that's the end of the first half. As the teams head to the locker room, the Spartans lead the Bulldogs by a score.
You guys stink. Geez, Coach, we're only down a couple of points. No, I mean you guys really smell. You need to hit the showers. And here, I got every one of you new bars of soap from the Sterling Soap Company. Each bar is artisan crafted using natural ingredients and essential oils. They also have shave soaps, colognes, beard balm, and a whole lot more. Now get in there. But Coach, we have another half to play. I don't care. I can't stand to be around you.
A few minutes later.
All right, bring it in tight. You guys are still playing terrible, but you're smelling great out there. Now listen, you're going to need to stock up for the rest of the season. We got a lot of tough games left. So go to sterlingsoap.com after the game. That's STIRLING soap.com. You got that? Yes, Coach. Great. sterlingsoap.com on 3. 1, 2, 3. sterlingsoap.com. So those of us who have been around for a while know that there have been several attempts to compete with the National Football League, either directly or indirectly. Now, this is not a comprehensive list, but there was the World Football League, the World League of American Football, the USFL. Currently, there's the UFL, and there have been a variety of indoor leagues, and in the early 2000s, there was the XFL. From the loins of World Wrestling Federation head honcho Vince McMahon sprang forth the most entertaining and unhinged version of the game. There were rules to the game, but the way it was presented was kind of a breath of fresh air compared to the corporate feel of the NFL. And while most people remember Rod He Hate Me Smart, on March 10th, 2001, Jeff Brom achieved legendary status. Now, Brom had bounced around the NFL, signing contracts with 6 NFL teams in his 7 years in the league, but only ended up playing 8 games. He finally got his chance to shine in the XFL with the Orlando Rage. Well, on the 10th, the Rage were at home taking on the Las Vegas Outlaws. 6 days prior, Brom had taken a devastating hit in a game against the Memphis Maniacs that knocked him out. After a visit to the hospital, he came back to the sidelines with a neck brace. Now, for a lot of guys, the season would have been done. In today's NFL, with the concussion protocols, he probably would have been out at least a week or two. But not Brom. Instead, he suited up to play against Vegas on the 10th to the dismay of a lot of folks, but he clarified why he was playing right before kickoff.
Jeff Brom, how in the world are you starting this game tonight after taking that hit just 6 days ago?
Well, let me answer that question by asking you 2 questions. One, is this or is this not the XFL? Yes, it is. 2, do I or do I not currently have a pulse? Yes, I do. Let's play football.
Legend status achieved, and Brom led the Rage to the 23-15 win. Let's make another stop on March 10th, going back to 1976 for this one. Now, one of the most familiar sports phrases was printed for the very first time on this day, and it soon found itself being used in conversations every day. Okay, let's start off with this. By a show of hands, who is an opera fan here? Okay, keep them up here. Quick count, that's 0. Nobody likes opera. But you don't have to be a patron of the arts to know this story, and it's okay if your appreciation of opera goes no further than, that Bugs Bunny cartoon to understand the phrase, "It ain't over until the fat lady sings." And that phrase morphed from a conversation that then appeared in print on this day 50 years ago. In the March 10, 1976 edition of the Dallas Morning News, there was an article about the game between Texas Tech, and that phrase morphed from a conversation that then appeared in print on this day 50 years ago. In the March 10, 1976 edition of the Dallas Morning News, there was an article about the basketball game between Texas Tech and Texas A&M in the Southwest Conference Tournament Final that was played on March 6th. The 19th-ranked Aggies rallied to tie the game at 72. Dallas Morning News sports writer Bill Morgan leaned over to Texas Tech Sports Information Director Ralph Carpenter and said, "Hey, Ralph, this is going to be a tight one, huh?" To which Carpenter replied, "Right, the opera ain't over until the fat lady sings." The Red Raiders went on to win the Southwest Conference Tournament 74-72 and advanced to the NCAA tournament. But it was that phrase that caught on. The phrase got picked up by the old Washington Bullets in 1978 when head coach Dick Motta led the Bullets to an NBA championship as the 3 seed in the East. They were only a couple of games over 500 heading into the playoffs, with not many expecting them to get past the second round, but instead they advanced to the Eastern Conference Finals and then knocked off the top-seeded Philadelphia 76ers to move on to the NBA Finals against Seattle. The Bullets won that series in 7, and they were crowned NBA champs. Celebrating the title later, Motta had a T-shirt printed with the phrase, "The opera isn't over till the fat lady sings." And the phrase spread like a contagion, becoming what we now say, "It ain't over until the fat lady sings." Motta had apparently heard the phrase from a San Antonio sports writer when Washington played in Texas. The Bullets even used a picture of a stylized Brunhilde character holding the championship trophy with basketballs as the prominent features of the breastplate the character wears printed on cards and programs distributed to fans prior to the 1979 season. So, it is in reference to opera sopranos who were typically or stereotypically played by heavy women. The fat lady is usually seen as the Valkyrie Brunhilde, who is usually represented not only as heavy but also well-endowed, and is from a Wagner opera where Brunhilde sings the final 20 minutes, signaling not only the end of the opera, but the song is about the world ending. So on this day, we can celebrate Red Raiders Sports Information Director Ralph Carpenter, who said it, Bill Morgan for writing it, the Dallas Morning News for printing it, and the opera for giving us the line, "It ain't over until the fat lady sings." On March 9th, 1946, baseball's Ted Williams turned down a $500,000 contract to play in Mexico. So, we've talked about Babe Ruth's record contracts over the years, right? Here we are now, 16 years after Babe Ruth signed a record contract in 1930, and still no contract in the major leagues had surpassed that, and it would not for another 3. A lot of that time was spent in the Great Depression that the country started to come out of in 1939, and now here we are post-World War II, and contracts started getting bigger. Well, in Mexico, a millionaire by the name of Jorge Pascual wanted to build the Mexican Baseball League into a rival of Major League Baseball in the U.S., and so he started raiding major league teams attempting to lure away players with big money contracts. And it ended up being a threat to MLB's reserve clause 25 years before Curt Flood. But we'll get to that in just a second. The first player that Pascual successfully lured south was New York Giants outfielder Danny Gardella. Gardella had only played 2 years in the majors and was a pretty light-hitting player. He did have 19 home runs in 45, and he was offered $5,000 a year to stay with the club for the next 2 years. He wanted more, and so he took an $8,000 a year offer and a $5,000 signing bonus to play in Mexico. It was the start of the so-called Mexican League War. Now, it wasn't long before 4 more players signed to play in Mexico, the most prominent of that bunch being Giants pitcher Sal Maglie. But Maglie was an unknown property at that point, and he would not make a name for himself until he returned to the States in the 50s. And then, Pasquale started going after the big names. New York's Phil Rizzuto was offered a $60,000 contract. Cleveland's Bob Feller was offered a 3-year contract for $120,000 per year, and Boston's Ted Williams was offered a 5-year contract worth $500,000 when he was making $40,000 a season at that point. Now, all of those guys said no, Williams doing it on this day in '46, but there were guys that did play south of the border. The St. Louis Cardinals lost a trio of players, and it forced Commissioner Happy Chandler to clamp down. Chandler declared that any player who skipped out on his contract and went to play in Mexico, they would be banned from baseball for at least 5 years. He also said that anybody who played with or against those players, or managed them or against them, would also be punished. That had an effect on Cuban, Panamanian, Venezuelan, Puerto Rican, and other Latin American players that played in their own country's leagues and also played against the Mexican League in the winter. Pasquale's plan for the Mexican League did not last long. Those big contracts he had signed with the 20 or so major leaguers who went south weighed very heavily on the league, and it shut down in 1948 with Pasquale resigning as president. Now, the challenge to the reserve clause. Gardella sued Major League Baseball in '47, challenging that reserve clause. 2 other players also sued, claiming MLB was a monopoly in violation of antitrust laws. All 3 players were denied by the U.S. Court of Appeals in 1949. Chandler, hoping to quell any more challenges, reinstated all the players after just 3 years instead of 5, and they were allowed to play in the 1950 season. Interesting to think what Happy Chandler would have considered if Ted Williams had been part of that mix and taken that contract on this day in 1946. On March 11, 1974, the commissioner of Major League Baseball stepped in and told the Atlanta Braves and Hank Aaron that he had to play. The start of the '74 season was still about 3 weeks away at this point, but in spring training, the Braves and Aaron had been asked about the pursuit of Babe Ruth's all-time home run record. At this point, Hank had 713 career homers, 1 shy of tying and 2 from breaking the mark. The Braves were starting off the season on the road with a 3-game series against Cincinnati. And the Braves had said they were probably going to use Aaron as a pinch hitter in that series in the hope that he would hit the record home runs in front of the hometown crowd in Atlanta. But Commissioner Bowie Kuhn, who always liked to parrot the phrase "in the best interest of baseball," told the Braves that Aaron, barring injury, needed to be in the lineup in at least 2 of the 3 games of that opening road series. The reason for the 2 out of 3 demand is that Aaron had played 2/3 of the games in 1973. As it turned out, Aaron hit a home run in the season opener in a 7-6 loss on April 4th. And now for the kicker. When Aaron actually broke Ruth's record in Atlanta on the 8th, Bowie Kuhn was not in attendance. On March 14, 1980, tragedy struck as a plane carrying 14 U.S. amateur boxers along with 8 staff members crashed in Warsaw, Poland. The USA boxing team was on the way to an international event in Poland in advance of the 1980 Olympic Games. At this point, the U.S. government had not yet made the decision to boycott the Summer Games held in Moscow later that year. This event was supposed to be a final tune-up for the U.S. amateurs to get another look at boxers that they may meet in the ring in a couple of months. But the Polish IL-62 jetliner encountered problems on approach. Sun streaming into the cockpit temporarily blinded the pilots, and they couldn't see the light indicating the landing gear had been deployed. Fearing the gear was not down, the pilots put the plane into a climb. But the gear was down, and instead of climbing, the plane nosedived, killing all 77 people on board, including the 22 members of the USA boxing contingent. Of the 14 boxers who lost their lives, 24-year-old Lemuel Steeples was considered by boxing experts as the best hope to win gold in Moscow and projected to have a very promising professional boxing future. He was the reigning national Golden Gloves champ, beating future welterweight champ Milt McCrory to win that title. He also won the light welterweight title at the 1979 Pan Am Games. Boxing aficionados point out that was the same weight class that Sugar Ray Leonard won at the Pan Am Games in 1975 and then went on to win gold in the 76 Montreal Olympic Games. Steeples' gravestone reads, "Gold Medal Winner," as a nod to what many thought was in store for him in the near future that was sadly lost in 1980. Just 7 days later, President Jimmy Carter made the announcement that the U.S. would boycott the Moscow Olympics due to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. And time now for today's That's Got Nothing to Do with Sports fun fact. When it gets really hot in Australia, the nectar in flowers turns to alcohol. When bees come by to collect that nectar, well, they get a little drunk. There are bees at the entrance at the hive, though, who act like bouncers and keep the drunk bees from entering until they sober up. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.